Hello parents. This short presentation is going to be about the value of developing your children's literacy. Literacy has long been considered one of the foundational skills that a good education gives students. A simple way to think about literacy is as the ability to read critically and write clearly. The need to read well never goes away. Regardless of the job your child works, there will always be instruction manuals, job contracts, and leases that your child will have to read and understand. Similarly, there's no escaping the necessity of writing well. There are reports at work, emails to bosses and colleagues, even messages to friends. The success of these things hinges on the ability to write clearly. Another way to think about literacy is about what grows out of reading and writing well. This is the ability to communicate effectively. Communication is about taking the thoughts that are in our heads and expressing them in a way that is easy for other people to understand. Learning how to write develops this ability. But communication is also about understanding what other people in a conversation are themselves expressing. This is where the importance of learning how to read comes in. Allow me now to detail what the tutoring sessions will be like. The tutoring sessions will focus on both the basic skills that students need to read and write well, as well as broader, higher order skills like writing and revising. Basic skills include developing a nuanced and expanded vocabulary, how to conjugate verbs correctly, how to use commas, semicolons, etc., and much more. By working on their basic skills, students will develop confidence in their grasp of the English language, and in turn, by developing confidence, will become better at expressing themselves. The training of higher order skills will involve taking all the basic skills and applying them into an assignment like an essay. In writing an essay, students need to have the bigger picture in mind, focusing on what their argument is, whether the evidence is strong and makes sense, but they must also be aware of the basic skills that make up their essay, whether their use of commas is correct, whether their verbs are in the correct tense. The writing assignments that I give to students will train them in both of these domains. So here's an example of a vocab worksheet. What I do is, as the students do their readings, I have them underline the words they don't understand. I then take those words and create this worksheet where I give the students a definition of the word and an example or two. Instead of merely asking the students to memorize my definition, which has been shown to be an ineffective way to learn, I ask students to define the term themselves in their own words. What this does is it forces the students to really try to understand the word. They can only define it if they have understood it. I then have them come up with examples from their own lives. Research shows that information that is related to oneself is more easily remembered. And then finally, I ask them to come up with a symbolic representation of the word. This may seem strange, and it kind of is. But again, it forces the students to think critically about the word. If they cannot think of a scenario in which the word applies, then they don't truly understand the word. So an example is for the word aptitude. A student of mine drew a video game controller and gave the following example. I have an aptitude for video games. By writing this, the student ties the word aptitude, which means an ability or strength, to their skills at playing video games. In doing so, they solidify in their minds the understanding of the word. In later sessions, I test the students' memory of the words, and I have them use the words in writing a paragraph. Usually these worksheets contain 10 vocabulary words, which may not seem like a lot, but if the student has one session a week, that amounts to 40 newly learned words in a month, which is nearly 500 in a year. It adds up. The following is a worksheet on thesis statements. So thesis statements are essentially what essays are about. The thesis statement captures the essence and the goal of an essay. They are notoriously hard for students to write, and even harder to come up with. This worksheet accompanies a lesson in which I give to students on how to formulate a strong thesis statement. And then after the lesson, they begin the worksheet by analyzing bad thesis statements. They are given examples of bad ones so they can know what to avoid in their own writing. But they are also asked to change the bad into good, which gives them practice and revision, which is a skill they need in their own future writing. The next section of the worksheet gives the students a topic question and asks them to come up with a thesis. I ask for 2 to make it even more of a challenge, but to also show the students that there are multiple solutions to a problem, multiple pathways to take when answering an essay. In the final section, I give the students a topic. I leave it up to them to think of a topic question, after which they again have to come up with 2 thesis statements. This latter exercise is important and critical because it becomes a skill that is absolutely necessary in university. Very rarely in university essays are topic questions offered. Sometimes not even topics are given. Sometimes students are merely asked to do research and then come up with a topic of their own choosing, upon which they have to come up with a question about the topic, and then finally to answer that question themselves. And this happens in all subjects in university, not just English, but also in psychology and the sciences as well. So it's a very important skill to develop. These are some examples of things we do in class. I also assign homework. I tend to err on the side of assigning more rather than less homework, but I also try to be mindful of students' workloads when they are in school. Much of the homework will be assigned readings. The simplest and easiest way to get students better at reading is to have them read. There's no way around it. As for my method, I have students read a wide variety of high-quality texts. This includes, of course, fiction, which are mostly short stories, though occasionally I'll assign a novel, and poetry, but also nonfiction texts and philosophy texts. The reason I assign such a variety of readings is partially to keep the kids interested. Not everyone likes fiction, but more importantly, it's to get the children used to reading any kind of document. When they're adults, they may not have to read a novel, but they will certainly have contracts and leases to read through, so it's good for them to have experience reading all sorts of texts. You may notice that I've also included their own writings as texts that they will be reading. I do this because of how important I believe that being a good editor of one's work is. I firmly believe that students can improve their essay marks by 5, even 10%, simply from reading over and editing their work before they submit it. This is a lesson that has taken me a long time to learn, but I know from first-hand experience that it is absolutely true. Revision will aid your children in catching all the mistakes they inevitably make in a first draft, but it will also force your children to hear their awkward sentences and to clean them up, and doing so will make them a stronger writer. So here I have an example of a worksheet I would give for homework. This worksheet would accompany a reading. In this case, it is a short story. The first few questions are simple reading comprehension questions. This is where I test if your child is reading the story or whether they are struggling, and then if they are, we talk about the reasons why. Sometimes it's vocab, sometimes it's something else. The next few questions are longer answer, where I challenge your child to think critically about the story. And then I close off these worksheets, all of the homework worksheets I close off in the same way, with an essay question, which leads well into my next slide. I also assign a lot of writing homework. Essays will be a constant in your child's tutoring experience. I try my best, as I do for the readings, to assign a variety of writing assignments. Many will be essays, simply because essays are a staple of high school and university education, so students need to know how to write them. And essays are a great way to train and test your child's critical thinking on an issue. But I mix it up as well. I assign letters and journal writings and creative assignments. This is partially to have your child become the kind of writer who can express themselves in any medium. But it is also because essays, especially analytic essays, while very important in academia, lose their importance as children age. I know very few adults who write essays as part of their job. Many adults, however, have to write letters, or more commonly, emails, which, while requiring a general skill in writing, also asks for a different set of skills from a writer than an essay does. In writing an email, your child has to be able to write less formally than a standard email, otherwise they risk coming off cold and distant to coworkers and bosses. But they also have to ensure that they don't cross the line too far into informality. It's a fine line to walk, and it's one that I train your children to walk effectively. Narratives, like narrative essays and creative writing, are also important too, and there's a practical reason for this too. When your children apply to university, there will certainly be a question on their application that asks them to detail a personal life experience. They won't be asked to analyze that experience, but rather to tell a story that highlights their strengths without sounding like they are bragging, as well as their weaknesses, and a story that is compelling and interesting. And this is difficult. But by the time the university application season comes around, your children will already have much experience in writing these kinds of essays, and so should have no problem at all. To summarize, your children will be developing the ability to read critically in a wide variety of disciplines. They will develop the ability to write clearly across a number of different forms, and they will develop the ability to communicate their thoughts clearly and effectively. Whether your child is going into medical school, law school, engineering, or business, they will need to have the ability to read and write and communicate effectively. The necessity of these skills never goes away. If they pursue tutoring and if they work hard, they will gain these abilities. Thank you, parents.